Good morning, Room 219, and welcome back for another social studies lesson. We're going to continue working on our novel Guns for General Washington. So in our last video, we worked from lessons 9 through 12. So today, we're only going to work on the chapters 13 and 14. And then I will send you 2 questions to answer about the chapters. 1 for each chapter. That's it. Very simple. But please read the text carefully. If you don't understand something, please message me on Google Classroom. I am more than happy to answer any questions you may have. So you can do well on this assignment, okay? So let's go ahead and turn to chapter 13 of the book. And the chapter is titled Good News for the British. So if it's good news for the British, it's bad news for the who? For the colonists or the rebels. Where that is on page 76. If you need a moment to find that page, go ahead and pause the video. But if not, and you're already there, then let's go ahead and begin. While Henry Knox's cannon convoy was stalled at the Mohawk River, Major General William Howe, back in Boston, was busy making plans. And Major General William Howe, which side of the war was he on? Was he a British general or was he an American general? Or rebel general. Right, he was a British general. He was the one that was blockading Boston after the Boston Tea Party and the massacre. Okay. In his cabin aboard HMS Somerset, Sir William read a secret dispatch from London. He read it through, then read it again. Locking it in his desk drawer, he leaned back and smiled. After so many disappointments, it was nice to have good news. So I like that word dispatch. It was a secret dispatch that gave him good news. So what is another synonym we can use for dispatch? All right, if you said letter, message, card, all of those are correct. It's a secret message. Obviously, who do they want not to get their hands on this? Anyone who's not British or a rebel. Or American. Muffled against the cold, the British commander stepped on deck and looked around the harbor. Like faithful watchdogs, his ships were all in place, standing guard over the helpless city. Howe began to pace alongside the ornate railing, reviewing it in his mind, the events that he had recently taken place. 2 weeks ago, in mid-December, transports had sailed in from England, bringing in a regiment of Marines. Then other ships had arrived from the Bay of Fundy in Canada, carrying hay and grain for the horses. But the real supply convoy, the one he'd been counting on, had met with disaster. Which one do you guys think it was? Let's see if you're right. 26 ships had left Plymouth, England, bound for Boston Harbor. They carried thousands of redcoats as well as cannons, powder, food, and muskets. Everything the general was waiting for. Then in mid-ocean, the convoy sailed into a hurricane. The ships were scattered and blown off course, and they wound up far to the south of the British West Indies. During the storm, many soldiers were lost and the ships were damaged. Some had escaped without much harm, but it would take a long time for those ships to be refitted, then to beat their way north in the middle of winter. So that was some bad news. He was waiting on those ships, 26 ships, but what slowed him down? Right, a hurricane. So was this any human-made disaster? No, it was nature itself. Adding to Howe's problem, he had to deal with the cursed little ships called privateers. Remember what were privateers? We talked about it in the last chapter. Right, they're like pirates for hire, if you will. And who were hiring them were the American colonists. These weren't part of an official navy, but the rebel Congress allowed them to capture any British vessels that came their way. To the colonists, the raiders were heroes, but to General Howe, the armed privateers were plain pirates. Lawless ships that stole out of port and attacked his merchantmen. then took cover in many bays and inlets of New England. The privateers not only captured Howe's cargoes, but they then escaped to shallow waters where his warships couldn't follow. So again, we've talked about perspective before. So to the Americans, what were the privateers? They were heroes, correct, because who were they supported by? The Congress. But to the British, the privateers were pirates, making them bad guys, right? And to him, he didn't like them because they were taking what from him? The supplies that he wanted for this war, that he needed for this war. So, again, it all depends whose point of view you're looking at. All in all, 1775 had been a black year for Sir William, a year filled with trouble. But the secret dispatch that had arrived gave him hope. According to this message, a new supply fleet was being assembled, even larger than the last. After the start of the year, this convoy would cross the Atlantic with the reinforcements he needed. In a neat, flowery hand of the Secretary of Admiralty had promised Howe 40,000 troops, plus weapons to carry out all his plans. For 1776 and up to May of 1777. That is a lot of people. And that is great news for the general. The general returned to his cabin to study his maps. He could rely on the Admiralty. If the weather behaved, the transports and supply ships would arrive soon. Then, with a powerful new force, he would strike. He was tired of the stalemate, tired of the inactivity, tired of the fool rebels with their prattle about freedom and liberty. Sir William Howe could hardly wait to crush Washington and his colonial army once and for all. So, what was the good news that the general received? Right. That he's getting reinforcements. That's what we call reinforcements. And it was a really big number, too. All right, let's go on to chapter 14, Dangerous Ice. Remember, the last time we stopped, we left our convoy. They were going to cross, do you remember which river? The Mohawk. Miss Sosa had to look, too. Sorry. It's been a while. So, and what did they discover about the ice before they were going to cross? That's right. They said that the ice was too thin in the middle. And they have a mile of heavy cannons to take over that ice. So do they think it will work? It's not looking good for the rebels. But let's see what happens. Henry and his men spent the first day of 1776 trying to strengthen the ice on the Mohawk. To begin with, they laid out the shortest route across the river. Then, at certain spots, the men chopped holes through the ice. Water gushed up from these holes and flowed across the surface. Okay. In the cold wintry air, the water froze quickly, adding a new layer of what was there before. Okay, so that's what they're working on in this first paragraph. Let's draw this out. So they got to get across the river, and like we said, it's not thick enough, the ice, to support the weight. So the first thing they figured out is where was it the least amount of ice to cross, the shortest crossing. So there. Then, what they were doing upriver, where they were going to cross, they were making holes in the ice. Not too many, I would imagine, but some. Now, you would think they're breaking holes in the ice, that's going to cause it to break the ice further down. I thought so too, but it's clever what they're doing. So when the water comes out onto the surface of the ice, it's the middle of winter. What do you think that water is going to do once it leaks up there? It's going to go back into ice. It's the water cycle, right? So it's going to become ice and it's going to refreeze. So if the ice refreezes here in this thick section, maybe, just maybe, it'll get thick enough for them to cross. You understand the plan now? If you don't, please message me on the Google Classroom. All right, let's continue. The crew did this several times until the ice had built up and thickened. Now it was stronger, but would it be strong enough? Will stepped out onto the river. He walked up and down, frowning. It might hold the big loads, he said to his brother, but I'm not powerfully sure. So he has his doubts. Henry shrugged. We won't know until we try. But we'll move the guns one at a time, starting with the lightest. Tell the drivers that no team is to go until the one before is safe on the other side. The colonel had a long rope tied up in front of each sled and wagon. The other end was attached to the harness of a team that did the hauling. Ooh, hauling. We talked about that word. What does that word mean again? It means to pull. Very good. A man walked alongside this rope, holding a sharp axe. Colonel Knox climbed on the first sled and took the reins. Keep an eye on that rope, he said at the man with the axe. If the sled breaks through the ice, cut the rope fast. Then if it goes down, the load won't drag the team along with it. But you'll have to look sharp. So what is the purpose of the man with the axe? What is he supposed to do? What is he going to cut? Right, he's going to cut the rope in case the ice breaks, so they don't drag all the rest of the team down with them. Man, he's better be paying attention then. Everyone stood on the bank, watching tensely as Henry snapped his reins. The horses leaned into the traces and stepped out onto the ice. It crackled a few warnings, but it managed to hold. Carefully, foot by slow foot, the sled moved across the frozen river. Sweating in spite of the cold, Henry talked to the horses, coaxing them. William bit his lip anxiously. J.P. Becker held his breath. The sled passed the halfway mark and drew near to the far shore. In a few more minutes, though it seemed like hours to the men, the guns were across and the horses scrambled to safety. Henry hopped down and joyously waved his hat. Will and the others cheered wildly and hurried to get the next sled ready. So one across, so many more to go. Then one by one, horses and oxen tethered to the long taunt rope hauled the cargo across. And every step of the way, the man with the axe stood ready in case of danger. The river passage took all afternoon. Finally, every load was across the Mohawk except for 3 cannons, the heaviest of all. These were Henry's pride and joy, and the most important of his weapons, and he wanted to be sure they would make it across safely. So he had fresh holes chopped along the route. In the gathering darkness, the river water gushed from the holes and swept across the ice. So he had more holes made. All the other cannons have made it across. So everything else is over here. We're waiting on 1, 2, 3. So he had more holes made and let the ice freeze. Again, why do you think he's doing that? Yes, these are the heaviest, so do you want to make sure your ice is extra thick? I would think so too, yeah. So, by morning the new layer should be frozen fine, Henry said to Will. Then we'll try crossing the big guns. So they're going to let the ice freeze overnight, and then tomorrow try the last 3 cannons. That night after supper and hot coffee brewed over the campfire, the men sat around smoking their pipes and staring into the flames. One of the soldiers took a wooden fife from his tunic and began to play softly. J.P., sitting with a warm blanket around his shoulders, recognized the tune, the Liberty Song. was a favorite among the colonists. In fact, some thought of it as their new anthem. A few troopers began to sing. One moment, my laptop is doing something here. There we go. The boys listened happily to the stirring words. Come join hand in hand, brave Americans all, and rouse your bold hearts at fair liberty's call. No tyrannous act shall suppress your just claim, or stain with dishonor America's name. As the sound of the fife slid into the chorus, others added their voices. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we'll live. Our hearts are ready, steady, friends, steady. Not as slaves, but as free men, our strength we will give. The campfire blazed in the night air. Orange flames leaped high into the black sky. Their brightness echoing the bright hopes of a country struggling to be born. At daybreak, the men prepared for the test. The first of the huge guns hauled by 4 pair of oxen was eased carefully onto the frozen river. The ice creaked and cracked as if complaining about its burden, but the extra thickness worked. The surface held. When the gun was across, the second cannon was moved without incident. Finally, there was only the 24-pounder left. This was Will's gun. He wouldn't allow anyone else to take it across. He climbed aboard the sled and guided the oxen out onto the ice. The creaking sounds grew louder and more menacing. Will sat tensely, hardly daring to breathe. The axeman, walking alongside, looked nervous and tested the sharpness of his blade. The oxen passed the halfway point. Slowly they inched closer and closer to the far shore. Henry started to breathe a sigh of relief. Crack! Crack! The noise came sharp and loud, almost like gunfire. A great huge gap opened in the ice. Will jumped from the sled. The axeman leaped forward, swung his blade, and parted the rope. As the gun went under, the oxen, suddenly free of their load, reacted with fear. They lunged forward, trying to reach safety. JP's father, who was standing nearby, dove at the harness to keep the clumsy animals under control. He was yanked forward, where he tripped over a tree root and fell to the ground. The old farmer lay on the frozen shore, holding his shoulder and gasping. JP rushed over, his face pale with alarm. A soldier who had been trained as a medical orderly also hurried over. He knelt down and examined the groaning man. "It's not serious," he said. He threw his shoulder out. "I can put it to rights, but he'll need a sling. Afraid he won't be able to use the arm for a few days." Whew, so JP's father is okay. He's hurt, but he'll be fine. While the troopers went to work on Mr. Becker, Henry and Will took a look at the sunken cannon, so they lost one. Luckily, it had gone down near the bank where the river was shallow. The parts of the gun and cart were still showing above the surface. What do you think? You think they're going to go for it? I think they might. Let's find out. Colonel Knox was not about to abandon his finest prize. "Bring plenty of rope and get some teams ready," he said to Will. "We're going to haul her out." So for the rest of the afternoon, the men strained and sweated, hauling on ropes, prying at the gun with stout poles, urging the animals on. Little by little, the monster crept free of the Mohawk's icy clutches and came to rest on the muddy bank. Worn out from the day's work, the crew camped right there at the river's edge. Hollow-eyed, they ate supper quickly and were soon asleep. All except JP. His father now felt better, but the boy sat beside him, keeping a drowsy watch. So, they got the first cannon and second cannon across just fine. But that third cannon, what happened to it? It sank. The ice broke. But it didn't break in the middle. Remember? He was breathing a sigh of relief at the halfway point. So it was more or less like around here, near the edge. So they spent the rest of the afternoon doing what? With getting the third cannon. They had to haul it out. They had to drag it out with horses and ropes and poles and dig out that cannon out of the water. But did they do it? Yes, they did. Very good. At dawn, the farmer, his arm in a sling, met with Colonel Knox. With his arm strapped, there was no way he could control the horses hitched to the Becker's wagon. Henry scratched his chin. His drivers were all needed elsewhere. He had nobody else to spare. J.P., standing nearby, cleared his throat and tugged at his father's shirt. Becker grinned. I know what's on your mind, John. You think you can handle 4 horses? J.P. nodded quickly. Sure I can, Pa. If you'll ride next to me, I'll do everything just the way you did. Colonel Knox was anxious to solve the problem, so he smiled his approval. Fine, son, fine. Then it's settled. With a nod, he hurried off to organize the rest of the caravan. Minutes later, Henry trotted by on his mare and signaled for the convoy to begin. With his father beside him, J.P. snapped his reins and called to the horses, trying to do it just as the older man had done, and the animals moved ahead, obediently. As the long line of vehicles lumbered away from the frozen river, John thought he would burst with pride. He wasn't an onlooker anymore. He was a real team member now, doing his bit for a great cause. And that's the end of chapter 14. So, what do you think? Do you think the title was appropriate for this chapter? So go ahead and work on those 2 questions for me. And next time I do social studies with you, we're going to do chapters 15 and 16. All right? Until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.